Well, hello and welcome to Head to Head. Apologies to those who tuned in a little early. We had one or two technical difficulties, but we're back up and running now. And we're even going to be even better this time because we had a practice run. So, first and foremost, before we get cracking into it, I just want to give a little bit of a plug for what we've got coming up. On the 11th of May, we've got an excellent discussion planned with our friend Godfrey Bloom hosting, and he's going to have Professor Lawrence Krauss with him and Anne Widdecombe, and they're going to be discussing theology and theocracy in the 21st century. Don't miss that. We've got Lawrence Fox coming up in the near future, Andrea Jenkins, MP, and don't forget we have all sorts of people coming onto these shows. It's not just the politicians. We have media people, we have sports people. This is a platform for free speech. So if you like the idea of free speech, lots of views being aired, please share around what we're doing and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Right, we are going to be discussing tonight what is great about Britain, and having just displayed some great British ingenuity for getting around our technical problems, I'm delighted to be joined by a great Englishman, Roger Helmer. Roger, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill. It's great to be here.
And I will get straight into it and say, Roger, what's great about Britain?
A great question and a great subject. Thank you very much indeed for that. And I've got to let you into a secret to start with. My personal view is that Britain is a great country. And I want to tell you just briefly why I think that's the case. I think anybody's attitude to their own country is probably based to an extent on subjective factors. You can't help feeling warm about the country you were born in. But in our case, it's also substantive factors, real things that work. It's not just the Union flag. Again, I have to admit that I think that it's one of the most distinctive and attractive national flags that you will see. But that's just my view. And there's an awful lot more to Britain being great than that. I think we can sometimes get at the subjective end of this by quoting the old poet. And I like to quote Sir Walter Scott, who said, "Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, this is my own, my native land." And I'm sure we all will share a little bit of that. I like to what Shakespeare had to say in Richard II. He said, "This sceptred isle, this precious stone set in a silver sea, which serves it in the office of a moat against the envy of less happier lands." I've always loved those lines. It was only in the worst days of our European Union membership, when we really realized what an awful thing it was, that I read the subsequent lines. "This England, which was wont to conquer others, hath made a shameful conquest of itself." And I'm afraid that's what we did. We made a shameful conquest of ourselves. And thank God we got out of it with Brexit. But one of the great things I think about Britain, and you can't get away from history, is the long gestation of democracy in our country over many centuries. You can't really say when democracy started. Some people would like to say, well, it was Magna Carta, wasn't it? And other people will say, well, it was the Glorious Revolution. And perhaps they'll say the Reform Bills, perhaps it was votes for women. In fact, it wasn't an event, it's been a process. And I think there's a contrast there with our neighbours in Europe, most of whom have only been democratic for a relatively short time. So I think that is one of the fundamental things that really differentiates us. I think in Britain we have and have had more freedom, at least until this COVID lockdown started, more freedom than almost any other country that I know. Freedom to travel, freedom of action, freedom of speech. And it's particularly tragic that now, as we speak, the whole freedom of speech issue is being challenged by the woke fraternity and by BLM, by cancel culture, and people are trying to ban us from expressing views. I think it's been freedom of speech historically that has been part of the driving force for the development of our country. And I think particularly of science and technology. When you look back to the great names in our country, they go all the way back to the 17th century. You've got Francis Bacon, 18th century, Isaac Newton, 19th century, Darwin. This century, all sorts of scientists have done remarkable things. Faraday, well, perhaps he was 19th century. You've got Rutherford in nuclear. Okay, he was born in New Zealand, but he did most of his work in Britain. Let's bring a Scotsman in. You've got Fleming, who discovered penicillin. All these wonderful people who have contributed to the development of science and technology. We have to put a caveat in here. Although Britain is brilliant at inventing things and discovering things, it's a well-known truism that we're actually not terribly good at commercializing them. So that's an area where we perhaps have to work harder. But I think it was Fleming's achievement with penicillin that is now mutating into the pharmaceutical industry, into the vaccine, and we can be very proud of the way the vaccine rollout has gone. And as a result of the vaccine rollout, I think we should, if Boris gets his finger out, as it were, we should be getting out of lockdown, getting the economy back. And I was very interested to read recently that the IMF, no less, has given a forecast in which they reckon that Britain will grow faster, the British economy will grow faster both this year and next year than any other Western economy. That's not just European economies, that's the American economy as well, which is a remarkable accolade when you consider how much money Biden is blowing on the American economy. Not only scientific and technical progress, social progress as well. You can go back to the Factories Act. We were early in the game of making rules that allowed workers to have more free time and a safer environment. We've often been ahead of Europe with employment regulations, especially in the protection of women's rights. But probably the biggest social progress that we've achieved in this country, of course, is the banning of slavery. We go back to Wilberforce and the amazing impact he had. And we didn't just pass a law that said you can't have slavery anymore. Something that an awful lot of commentators forget is that the Royal Navy spent decades and decades actually out in the Atlantic interdicting that slave trade between Africa and America and stopping the slave ships and making the slave trade unprofitable. And I think we should be extremely proud of that. And frankly, it makes me furious when Black Lives Matter go around saying, well, Britain is an institutionally racist country. And I was interested to read an international research study recently, opinion research, which showed that Britain was regarded as one of the least racist countries in the world and one of the best countries for ethnic minorities to get on and to be absorbed and to be accepted. And we should be proud of that. The other thing about Britain that I think is great, and that is global reach. Boris likes to talk about global Britain, and I think he's right to do so. The tragedy is that, I see on the screen, somebody's come up with Alan Turing and Stephen Hawking. Yeah, there are so many names. I had thought about both of those, and I thought I can't hit them with too many names, otherwise it'll sound like a catalogue. But you're absolutely right. They are.
Yeah, credit to Mr. Elder Brown for commenting on that, and please do send in your comments. We do read them. We do read them.
Yeah, but of course, you mentioned global reach. You get an awful lot of people, especially Remainers, who say, oh, you're harking back to the days of empire. You can't get over it. It's just sheer nostalgia. No, it isn't. It is a policy for the 21st century. We are an island nation. Our highways are the ocean and the seaways, and we should be connected to the rest of the world. It's been an anomaly that for nearly 50 years, we've been over-focused on Europe and under-focused on the rest of the world. And we see already in the trade statistics, we are doing less trade with Europe, but in February, we were doing more trade with the rest of the world than we had previously done. And I think that is a healthy shift. I like to think that I sort of represent this pattern of Britain because I was born in Southeast London during the Second World War. I went to school in Southampton, University in Cambridge, got a job in the UK, started working, but very soon I was working overseas. I went to Hong Kong first and then various countries in Southeast Asia, worked in Korea, I've worked in Europe, worked in America. So this whole idea of a global Britain and Britain's working globally in the world, I feel to an extent perhaps I demonstrate that. And I'm just so happy that the last 20 years of my career in politics, I've actually been able to work on this issue of getting Britain's freedom back and making Britain a free nation again. I was born a subject of the King. I shall die a British citizen, not a European citizen. And if I take pride in anything in my career, it is that.
And here to that. Here to that. Now, that was a massively extensive range of things that you've covered there, Roger. And I knew you would. And I knew you would. But I thought there might be one area that you missed. And I'm quite pleased because it's given me something to come in on, to just add to the debate as well. And there's a couple of areas. But first of all, I'll demonstrate the one. Cricket and sport. Britain, arguably, we invented some of the major sports in the world, but even if we didn't invent them, we spread them across the world. And we didn't just spread the rules of the game, we spread the ethos of British fair play. And if you, one of the bywords, really, the by phrases for something being done properly is, or not being done properly rather, is it's not cricket. And that is one of our greatest contributions to the world in general, I think, is this ethos of sportsmanship. And it does, all right, I know our modern sportsmen perhaps don't always live up to that, but there is still an element when a sport is played, and certainly in front of crowds in the UK, we don't like to see people twisting the rules. There's a lot of abuse. I remember when Jurgen Klinsmann came to play for Tottenham, and he used to do, as footballers around the world do, he used to simulate, as they call it, throw himself to the ground if he was touched. And he got so much abuse for it, by the end he turned it into his goal celebration because he realised that he had to change for a British crowd. And the same abuse goes to the Australian cricketers who were caught ball tampering and so on and so forth. So I think that that's a massive contribution as well to throw into the pot, is our spread of the great games around the world, cricket, football, tennis, you name it, but also our contribution towards the spirit of fair play that goes with them.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, you've got the wrong interviewee here because I'm afraid sport isn't terribly big on my list. I did think of quoting John Major and his line about what was it? Damp autumn mornings, ladies on bicycles, and the sound of leather on willow. And you're absolutely right. I think we have contributed enormously. By the way, although I don't follow sport, I did just catch the news before we came onto the show, and you will have seen that Dan West has beaten Djokovic in a tennis contest. And pretty remarkable. It's some time since we had a world-beating tennis player, so well done him. But yeah, you're more likely to get me talking about the arts and culture and taking a pride in the fact that two of the great choreographers of the 20th century were British, Macmillan and Ashton. I was watching Mailing, which is Macmillan ballet, earlier today, and that is fantastic. And I think the arts, let's say the arts generally, have been a massive invisible export earner for our country, whether that's the Beatles going to America or the Rolling Stones, of whom I know nothing.
You surprised me, Roger.
Or our orchestras and our opera companies and our ballet companies. And one of the tragedies one of the many tragedies of this whole COVID experience has been that these performing groups, musicians, actors, and so on, have been prevented from traveling. And I think the government was right to make some funding available for those industries, because not only do they travel abroad, wave the flag for our country, earn foreign currencies, but they also, of course, attract an enormous tourist business to London. People don't just come to London to look at monuments. They come to London to go to the theatre and to go to restaurants. We didn't talk about food. We could talk about food. Maybe that was the second thing you had in mind.
Well, actually, it wasn't, but we can discuss that shortly. But I've got another way Because I kind of predicted that you were going to go down the culture and arts route, and I thought of a way that I was going to outflank and put something in that I knew you wouldn't mention, and that it is to do with music. But the United Kingdom, and most specifically the West Midlands of England, invented something called heavy metal, and heavy metal music has transformed the face of music across the world, and it's huge everywhere. There are vast crowds, even to this day, going in support in Japan, and of course the United States have tried to claim heavy metal music for their own, but it was actually invented by a group of guys in Birmingham called Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, Ozzy Osbourne, and Bill Ward. They were working in factories in Birmingham, and they were musicians, but they got the rhythm and sounds of the presses and the sounds of the metal work, and it gave them an idea to invent a form of music that incorporated some of the drama and the sounds of that, and they became Black Sabbath, which then became the foremost heavy metal band the world has ever seen, and they invented a whole genre, and that is a huge thing. Just quickly to throw in before we go on with our discussion, we are being limited by Facebook, so please do share this content around those of you who enjoy what we're saying. Let's not let international corporations stop us shouting about how great Britain is. So, yeah, we spoke about music, Roger, and food. Now, we've taken a lot of stick over the years for British food, especially from our friends on the continent, probably most notably in France, saying that our food is not great. But I'd like to say that one of the advantages of our country, being an open, international facing country, is that our cuisine in this country incorporates so many different nations now, so many different cultures, that actually, for example, some of the Indian food that we eat in the UK is unrecognizable in India. For example, Baltis were invented in this country. We can the West Midlands again, Roger. By the way, well, we've contributed in cuisine in ways that maybe other countries couldn't have, and certainly haven't considered.
This is absolutely true. Could I just throw in another comment, Bill, before I get round to food? And I love getting around to food; it's one of my favourite things. But the idea that Facebook might be limiting the material that we're putting out, isn't it ironic that I was talking about one of the great things about Britain is freedom of speech, and isn't it tragic that we have the woke brigade trying to limit freedom of speech and actually prevent ideas from being expressed and shared? And what happens within 10 minutes of me saying that, but we hear that Facebook is limiting the distribution of this material. It's absolutely tragic.
Isn't it desperately sad as well that when we're having a conversation of positive aspects of our nation and our culture, which incorporates credit given to people who've come here from other countries, which incorporates an acknowledgement that we've benefited from being a global nation, that we are being treated as sensitive content? Isn't it absolutely outrageous that you can't say, I'm proud to be an Englishman, I'm proud to be British, and then discuss why without somebody thinking it's sensitive?
It is just astonishing. And as we were saying earlier, organizations like Black Lives Matter can criticize Britain, and nobody seeks to limit them. We say something positive about Britain, and we appear to be limited. Anyway, on the subject of positivity, yes, food. I mean, I can remember, I'm sure you can remember, Bill, although you're so much younger than me. You can remember when a big night out was prawn cocktail and a Burnie-in steak, and if you were lucky, you got some Black Forest Gatto for afters. And you're absolutely right. Because of the global influences we've had, we are now finding that restaurants across the UK are producing some of the best food in the world. I remember reading a news report a couple of years ago suggesting that British cooking was now better than French, and I don't think the French like that idea very much, but it's certainly true. I can remember the old days when I used to say I'd never had a bad meal in France and never had a good meal in Germany. And even that is, I'm afraid, no longer true. But you really can get good food here. And it's not just really fancy stuff and international cuisine. A lot of British cooking, pub food, Sunday roasts are done extremely well and are well worth looking for. And personally, I can't wait until we can get back into the pub to eat food undercover, because I don't know whether you've been out for your first pint yet, Bill, in a pub. I haven't, because I just don't want to sit there in the cold, and I didn't want a queue to go in. We were actually driving past a local pub saying maybe we could go in for a swift half. And we saw the queue outside and we said, no, we'll go home and have a drink there.
Yeah. Well, I desperately want to support it, and absolutely, I think we both back our hospitality industries and our pub trade. But when we were first allowed to go to the pub and sit outside, it was snowing here. So I thought perhaps I don't fancy it. Aside from the fact of all the rules and regulations of having to sit apart and not speak to each other, which kind of detracts from a pub as far as I'm concerned. But it does bring us to another area where I think we have excelled as a nation, and that is in our alcoholic beverages. Not only the brewing industry, where British beer is distinctive, and having spent many a year in enjoying your company as well in Belgium, supposedly great with beers, and there was some good beer there. They don't have anything to match our real ales. They don't have anything that could compare to the traditional brewing industry in the UK. And not only that, we talked about our great friends in France. Well, there's a great many English white wines now, which are being considered, particularly the sparkling wines, which are being judged as being as good, if not better, than champagne and some of the French products. So things again that we're not necessarily known for, but we are excelling at.
Yeah, you are right. And British sparkling wine, we can't really call it champagne, but British sparkling wine is now winning prizes ahead of French champagne. It's priced at much the same sort of level. It always astonishes me that you can't buy champagne cheaply in France, but you can buy sparkling wine, which is perfectly drinkable stuff, for €2 or €3 a bottle, which is fairly extraordinary. But I think what is going to happen now, seeing the pattern of trade that is apparently starting to emerge post-Brexit, and the general pattern is that Europe is making trade so difficult with us that they are actually selling us less stuff. I mean, they're shooting themselves in the foot. But as a result, we are buying more stuff elsewhere. And of course, we already buy a great deal of wine from what I tend to call colonial countries. In other words, countries that may at one time have been part of the empire. And very good wine it is too. And by the way, there's South America, and that wasn't part of the empire, but they also produce some pretty good wine, Chile in particular. But yes, and I think that Europe is rapidly going to start regretting the attitude they've taken to us, because they are actually reducing their sales to their largest international customer. I mean, what on earth are they thinking of? They can't be surprised if they lose money.
Exactly, and I shall be sure next time the Ashes are played in England and I get to Edgbaston and possibly Trent Bridge to watch, and you have the banter with the Australians, I'll be sure to remind them that you refer to them as a colonial country. I'm sure they'll thoroughly enjoy that, Roger. I might give them your number to respond to. But it's absolutely right. The European, or rather the EU. Let's not make that mistake. It's my fault there. The European people are not hostile, but the EU, as an organisation, is being hostile, and it gives us new opportunities. And realistically, we've spoken a lot about the past and the history of our nation, and it's fair to say that we were the first at many things, and many things. Even we spoke about Shakespeare briefly. Well, Hollywood, without actually using the models of Shakespeare for tragedy, farce, and so many other things, would not have storylines. Basically, you can look at almost all of the Hollywood blockbusters, and you could trace them back to being very similar to Romeo and Juliet, or King Lear, or Macbeth. You look back at them, there's a clear line. We've given so much to the world in the past, but I believe that with a post-Brexit situation where we are freed to do more, our best days don't necessarily have to be in the past. I think there's an opportunity here going into the future where Britain can again be seen to invent, to create, to lead the way on things. You don't have to be the world's largest country or the most powerful country. You have to be the world's most innovative. And I think that's where our strength has always lain.
I think you're right. And of course, we're not the world's largest country by any means, but bear in mind that we are in the top 10. So we are a very significant. I mean, people who supported the European Union love to talk about your small island. Well, it may be a small island compared, say, to Australia, but as an economy, it is a very substantial economy. And I'm just so encouraged by it is only early signs. And of course, we were all a little bit concerned. We always said that when we left the European Union, there would be a few bumps in the road. And certainly the problems that emerged in January were really quite worrying. So the fact that we're now seeing the numbers already, and we're not 3 months in yet, already starting to look much more positive. And the forecast, as I said earlier, from the IMF, looking very, very positive for the next couple of years. I think we can certainly be very encouraged by that. We have to look more at developing technologies that we invent, so that we actually create products and create business and create opportunities. And I'm afraid people have been saying that for a long time. It's easier to say than to do, but we must now be absolutely focused on doing that. But I agree with you. I think we have a huge opportunity. One of the problems that people didn't understand with the European Union was that the whole approach to regulation and the precautionary principle was designed to be safety first, but it was safety first to the extent that it just destroyed opportunity. It destroyed innovation. I actually heard an American commentator describing European agriculture as becoming a museum because they wouldn't accept new technologies. And that is certainly the case. Again, we saw this excessive caution with the vaccine rollout. They wanted to spend a lot of time testing and working out what to do and checking that they had the right thing and the right price before they placed the order. What they needed to do and what we did was realize that there would be a free-for-all for vaccines and get out there and get the orders placed early, plus developing, of course, the Oxford AstraZeneca. And I think we can't pin everything on vaccines, but at the same time, it is a beautiful illustration of how we could do so much better as an independent, agile nation rather than as an offshore province in a larger entity. When the government first said that it would not join the European Union's vaccine sourcing, I must confess, I privately had some qualms myself. I thought, is this wise? Is it going to come back and bite us? And in fact, it turned out to be exactly the right decision. And hopefully is an example of the sort of way we're going to conduct ourselves in the future.
Yeah, and there's a great opportunity. I mean, we speak of technology, and I see a great opportunity that doesn't get spoken about very much. But the European Space Agency, large amounts of the funding, of the scientists, of the expertise that has been going into that was British. And I think what we're starting to see now, there are some discussions, I think, where the British government is looking at maybe doing more of our own thing on that. Now, when it comes to technology, and I'm not suggesting, manned missions to Mars and Dan Dare and things like that, although personally I would quite like that. But the idea of getting our own satellites up, getting our own technology working on it, you only have to look at the number of patents and inventions that came out of NASA in the space race to understand the benefits of that. And there is a great opportunity because the British scientific community involved with space technology exploration is absolutely up there with the very best in the world. And here's a chance, I don't very often give credit to the government, but I do think that they're at least making the right kind of noises in that direction, as well as embracing private sector firms and being involved. I think that could be a post-Brexit idea, program that could really capture the imagination of the British public. Admiration for new technology and a new breed of heroes and adventurers to a modern day version of Drake and Raleigh and so on and so forth, but this time going upwards rather than across the sea.
Yeah, I didn't talk about our history of global exploration, but actually you're giving something away there, Bill, because I didn't think you were old enough to remember Dan Dare, but I'm delighted to hear that you are, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that is an area where I haven't studied it in detail, but it's very clear that in the area of space, although we don't have our own manned mission to Mars in the pipeline, we are making a major contribution, and our technology is traveling to other planets with other programs. That's all terribly important. Oh, the other area, of course, that we didn't talk about was the software business and the particularly the financial software startups in London, and the level of investment in those sorts of businesses is very high compared to other European countries. And we have to be sure that we keep the country attractive to foreign investors. I was very interested to see the way that the corporate taxes are going, and I'm very worried that I understand why Rishi wants to recover all the money he spent on the COVID thing and furlough and so on. But this sudden dramatic increase in 2 years' time in corporation tax, I think that a number of people will be looking at places to put their business, and they will say, well, we've been going to go to Britain, but maybe we won't go there because the tax has got so high. On the other hand, Rishi has extended the holiday on the housing tax, the stamp duty. And I see the OECD yesterday was reported as saying the best thing you can do in terms of taxation to promote a rapid recovery from the lockdown depression, as it were, is to scrap that stamp duty entirely, because it makes it easier for people to move jobs. The people who move always spend money on the removal process and buying new furniture and redecoration and so on. And that attracts VAT. So the money will be recovered by new activity instead of the taxation really preventing people from moving. So I think Rishi needs to be very careful. Of course, he's got to raise money, but he mustn't do it in ways that damage the economy and reduce investment.
Well, taxing your way out of a crisis is perhaps not what you would wish for. And it does put me in mind of something else that Britain's been great at. During the 20th century, I would argue that two of the greatest world figures in politics were British. Winston Churchill, without whom regardless of the negativity that has been thrown at him, without whom there is no doubt, certainly in my mind, that there would have been Nazi fascist domination in large parts of Europe, if not the world, and Margaret Thatcher, who played a massive part in winning the Cold War and created a school of thought using the ideas of Keith Joseph and many others, but helped to promote a school of thought of business-minded, low-tax, low-regulation thinking that has done more than virtually any other school of thought to raise the living standards of ordinary people than anything I can think of. So those two people, I think, again, I would argue, a reason to be proud of Britain.
Indeed, and very much heroes of mine. And again, it infuriates me when these BLM campaigners they start defacing statues of Winston Churchill and calling him a racist and a fascist. I mean, if they think Winston Churchill was a fascist, they should have seen the other guy. He was the other guy. Hitler was the real fascist. If you're choosing between political systems, then I think just about everybody would choose our political system and Winston Churchill as against the Nazi system and Hitler. And yet all these people can do, instead of looking at the superb achievement of Britain with at times standing alone, but later with American and other support, we finally defeated the Nazi machine, and we ensured the survival of democracy and liberty. And you and I might have been sitting here having a conversation in German if we hadn't won that battle.
Yeah. And who knows, we might have been sitting here being censored by big tech. Oh, hang on a minute, we are. But there's another, I think it's particularly poignant as well at this particular time to mention another thing that is great about Britain, another person who is great about Britain, and that's Queen Elizabeth II. An incredible woman, I would suggest the most famous woman in the world, almost universally admired and respected. Still, I've noticed that just a few short days after the death of her husband, back at work, and a definition of duty and of true leadership without the politics, really, and someone who I think the world over is recognised as being a symbol of one of the things that's great about Britain.
I absolutely agree with you. And the contrast, if you compare her with another very long-serving monarch, Queen Victoria, she lost her husband and consort actually when he was quite young. I'm trying to remember. I think he was about 40, wasn't he, when he sadly passed away. But she went away for years and was hidden away in is it Osborne House in the Isle of Wight, to the extent that the prime ministers at the time were actually pleading with her to come back, because it created a certain amount of anti-monarchy feeling that what do we have this queen for? We never see her. You are right. The Queen has worked so hard. And I mean, I occasionally pat myself on the back because I didn't retire at 65. I went on to 73. But for heaven's sake, she's 94 and she is still working. How she does it, it is quite extraordinary. When you asked me to give some thought to what's great about Britain, I was thinking about the national character. Now, it's a terrible thing to talk about the national character because, for a start, we're all different from each other. And one person's view might be quite different from another person's view. But I think we have an idea of what an Englishman should be like. And while we are recording our respect for Her Majesty, it's possibly worth also mentioning Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, because certainly in my mind, if you wanted to define what the Englishman's character should be, he was wonderful, he was effective, he did good things, he was concerned about people with problems. Look at his Prince's youth scheme. He was also wonderfully no nonsense. He wouldn't stand messing about, and he had a wonderful dry sense of humor. And I can't pretend for a moment to have emulated him, but I just wish I could.
And one of the great things, and one of the reasons why I get so angry about people considering patriotism and this kind of love fest for our country as being somehow wrong, is that Prince Philip wasn't born here, and as so many people who've come to our country, it doesn't matter whether you were born here. It doesn't matter what colour your skin is, what your sexuality is. It doesn't matter about any of those things. To be a great British man, a great English man, however you want to phrase it, you just have to embrace the values of our country and to become one of us and to show that you love our country. That is remarkably rare. And we've had sporting sides with, and certainly Olympic squads that have had people of every different ethnicity, and many of whom weren't born in this country, but they were fiercely proud of being British, as the Duke was. And I just think that this is something that is so often missed, that when you say you love Great Britain and the United Kingdom, when you love your country, it doesn't mean you hate anyone else. And it also means if you want to love it as much as us, and you've come here and you love it as much as us, then you're one of us.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. There's one lovely little story. There are so many stories about Prince Philip that we could be here for the rest of the night talking about Prince Philip stories, but I love this one. When he first arrived as the fiancé of the Princess Elizabeth, as she then was, he felt that he wasn't well accepted by the staff and the establishment at the palace. And he recalls one occasion when he was in Windsor Castle, and somebody said in a very patronizing way, you'll get used to this, you'll quite like it after a while. And he did say, he replied saying, my mother was born here. I thought it was absolutely marvelous line. Yeah. To contrast, though, you're absolutely right. If people want to be here and want to be one of us, great, they're welcome. The frustrating thing is that there is a minority, I'm sure, of immigrants who come here and want to live in our country, but actually hate the country and want to change it. That is the basis of quite a number of social and other problems that we have in the country. But you're right. I think it's good that we have this conversation, and it's good that we are not ashamed of being proud of our country and saying good things about it.
And actually, some of the people who I've encountered certainly over the last 10 years or so that I had political involvement and I was meeting a lot of people, some of the most unapologetically, fiercely patriotic people were people who'd come to this country or who were the children of the next generation along. And they often would look at me and say, what is wrong with you people? Why are you ashamed to boast about how great your country is? If it wasn't for the fact that it was so great, why do you think so many of us would want to come here and be part of it? And a lot of these guys will openly sort of slate me and say, come on, speak up, you can be more proud. Isn't it ironic that we've almost become ashamed of our greatness?
Well, that quote from George Orwell, I can't remember the exact words, but basically he said Britain is the only country where the administrative classes are ashamed of their own country. And that was true in his time. I mean, when was he writing? Sort of 80 years ago or so. And I'm not sure it's got an awful lot better. People are terribly shy about expressing positive opinions about their country. As you rightly say, you can have a positive opinion about your own country. It doesn't mean you hate other countries. I've spent most of my life, or large parts of my life, traveling to other countries. One of my favorite comments on Europe was, I love the culture of the cooking in the countryside. And I still do love the culture of the cooking in the countryside. And as soon as they allow us out of this country, my fiance and I will be on our way to probably to Madeira, where we've rather taken a fancy to the place. And we will be looking forward to eating the blackfish. And if you've never eaten blackfish, you want to go to Madeira and eat the blackfish. It is absolutely wonderful. I love Portugal, and I have loved living and working in Singapore, in Korea, and so on. So you don't have to hate other countries to love your own country. But I'm always happy to be back in Britain and back home again.
I think that's one of the characteristics, actually, about British people. I mean, we haven't even mentioned sense of humour particularly, but that's another thing that stands out. But one of our characteristics at our best is that we can be proud of our country. We can be proud to be British, but we can also love other countries with a sense of confidence that by loving another country, by respecting their people, we're in no way doing down ourselves, because one of our values is to be tolerant of other countries and to actually embrace their values and be happy to deal with them. That is almost, not uniquely, but it is, I think, something that's pretty special to British people at their best, that actually they can, whilst being patriotic, love other countries and deal with other countries as with no edge to it, no competition as such, other than the fact that we're working cooperatively and we can all get on.
Yeah, something you said earlier, Bill, actually makes a lot of sense in this context. You were talking about the way the EU is being extremely troublesome with trade and so on, and you qualified it by saying, of course, it's not the European peoples who are hostile, it's the European institutions, and you're absolutely right. And we both had the experience of working in the European Parliament, and I'm sure your experience, like mine, was that there were many, both other MEPs from other countries and staffers from a range of countries who worked with us. And there were some really lovely people there, and we were very happy to work with them. So it's the institutions, not the people.
Absolutely, and I second that. You know, the people that we both work with out in that European Parliament from every different part of the world were wonderful. John Grant here saying that we've given so much to the world. Stainless steel invented in Sheffield, absolutely. I used to sell it. Jet engines, cat's eyes, telephones, computer, railways, trams, the tin can, etc. Absolutely spot on, John. We've given so much to the world, and there's so much more we can give. We didn't even one thing you surprised me. We're coming to the end, Roger, but one thing you surprised me. You didn't even mention Adam Smith, and I thought that would be that would have been up there. But there's so much that we've contributed, isn't there?
Economics, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I think we're coming to the end. We've overrun a little bit on the time because we had a slight false start, which I'm sure, hopefully, the viewers will forgive. But final couple of words, Roger. If you could encapsulate to me what it is in a nutshell, in the essence of Britishness and Great Britain that makes you such a proud British person?
Well, the country, in a sense, has given me everything I have. And it's given me a great education. It's given me a great career. It's given me some great role models. I don't always keep up with them, but it has given me some great role models. And as I say, I believe it has been and will be after lockdown the freest country in which to live. And it's our job to keep it that way. That's the legacy we've inherited from those who went before us. And I think that is the gift we must pass on to the future generations.
Amen to that. A free, prosperous, and happy United Kingdom. It's all we can, all of us, hope for, and I'm sure we'll do it. Roger, as always, it's been an absolutely immense pleasure to share your company. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Bill. Me too.
And to everyone out there, if you've enjoyed it, please share it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget, we do get our little bit of a glitch with our friends in the global corporations. They don't necessarily want people to see a conversation like this. If you think that perhaps that might be a mistake and you'd like others to see this, share, add their comments as we've seen tonight, please share it round and encourage people to take part in the conversation. But from us tonight, it's just a very big thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.
Good night.